This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
Hi, I'm Nate.
I'm Gail.
And this is Full Mutuality.
On today's episode, we have me.
And me.
And you. We have
and
us.
You.
And you, the audience who's listening to us. We always have you. And for you is why we do this. I mean, we talk to each other all the time. So, we don't monologue just for ourselves because we have a lot of those. But this is for you. And we are happy that you have still tuned in, that you clicked on this, that you're still listening to us. You haven't heard us for, how long has it been since? I don't even remember when we last published an episode.
I can find out.
I'm going to guess it was it August? Was it August? Was our last episode in August? That's my guess.
Last episode
I could be wrong. July?
Was August 24th.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wasn't wrong. August, it was the last time, and that was about a little over a month before our wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, we just got really, really immersed in wedding planning. Well, you got really, really immersed in wedding planning.
You were planning the wedding too. Come on.
Oh, come on. So the stereotype is always that, the women do all the wedding planning, especially older brides. There's that Bridezilla label that gets put to older women who have been thinking about their wedding since they're little girls playing with dolls. And then, they just go nuts, micromanaging every detail. And that wasn't me.
That was me.
And so,
no, I wasn't like that.
No, you were not Bridezilla, Groomzilla, or whatever the groom version is. But you were not the stereotype of the man who just shows up to the event and I'm here. You did all the work. You actually put in way more work than me. And the wedding, not getting married wasn't my idea, but although it was both of our ideas. But the actual big wedding that we did, and it wasn't that big, 75 people. But the wedding that we had, even the size we had and sort of how things went was my idea, in the sense that's what I wanted. That was my dream, and what it was super important to me to have the people I love there, my family, my friends, and to enjoy this moment, our moment of. And the reason is because I feel like on an individual level, I fought long and hard to get into a healthy relationship. I feel like unless you've been in a bad relationship, I was in one of those, but unless you've gone through an unhealthy relationship, it's hard to realize how difficult a good relationship is going to be, how scary that is to change paths, to change courses, to be in something where you can feel free to be yourself, where you can feel free to be accepted as you are. And for those reasons, that was really important for me to kind of honor what I've been through as an individual to get into a healthy relationship. And also for us as a couple, what we've been through in the last 5 years. I've talked about it before, but yeah, you don't start cross-border dating and usually imagine that some global pandemic is going to go down and separate the two of you where you can't even cross the border into each other's country, especially Canada, the US.
Yeah, there are some other country borders where you would be taking a pretty big risk. But the US and Canada, that's not a country border that you would imagine, hey, this might shut down at some point.
Never in history has it happened. And from a Canadian perspective, I'll put it this way for Americans. Most of you guys don't live near a Canadian border. But most Canadians live near the American border. Most Canadians live if you look at all the Canadian cities, the major ones, they're about an hour away or less from the American border.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because you go too far from the American border and you're now in territory that's uninhabitable for a good chunk of the year.
Very cold. Already where I live is pretty cold in Montreal, but yeah, you don't want to go up too far north. Most of Canada is uninhabitable because it's too cold, and there are people who do live in those climates and who have been living there before Europeans crossed and colonized the place, and who are very familiar with how to navigate that kind of weather. But for a lot of us, no, we just don't have the knowledge and generations of doing this. And so we live near the American border. We cross over often. Canadians are very familiar with Americans in the U.S. because we travel to most Canadians have a passport. And I don't know that that's true the other way around. I don't think it is. I think Canadians are more well-traveled
Probably, yeah. There's certainly a higher percentage of Canadians who have a passport than there are of Americans who have a passport. I guess I just grew up in an environment where it was assumed that you would have your passport. I guess for me, being, first generation American, it just makes sense for me to have my passport since so many of my relatives do not live in this country.
Right.
So I guess I'm just used to the idea of having a passport. But yeah, now that I'm like talking about it, I'm kind of curious, like, what percentage of Americans have a passport versus
stuff we're going to be Googling later.
I know, right?
we fall down
on the Google machine.
Like even the whole, longest undefended border in the world, Canada, US. Nate and I actually did the rabbit hole, fell down it just to find out, is it the longest undefended border? And we came up with some interesting facts. I don't even remember.
It is definitely the longest undefended border in the world.
That's if you
between
include
two countries. But it's
Alaska,
also,
right?
Yeah, that's if you include Alaska. But even without Alaska, it is the longest undefended contiguous border between the Canada and the lower 48. But it's also, including Alaska, just straight up the longest border between two countries in the world.
In the world, right? That kind of makes it easy to win that one. Yeah. But like we went down a whole rabbit hole looking up all the borders in the world. And this is what we do. I don't know who else is like that, but maybe it's an ADHD thing. I don't know. But yeah, when it comes to Americans and passports, so you have one because your family, your relatives, your grandfather lived in Japan, your grandma before they passed, and you still have cousins and relatives there, and you go back and visit. A lot of Americans have family that's only in the U.S. That's also common for a lot of people, not everyone. And also the U.S. kind of has a lot of different climates. Like I feel like you could, if you want to go to a snowy mountain and go skiing, you've got Colorado. If you want to go to a sunny beach that has more of a warm climate, you've got Florida. Or if you want to go to the desert, or like I feel like the U.S. kind of has a little bit of it has all different kinds of, like within huge country.
Within its own border, you don't have to go to another country to experience something completely different. You've got very, very urban areas. You have very, very rural areas. We've got national parks. We've got, so the U.S. definitely has a lot, which then, I guess makes people complacent, and
you don't need to travel the world. You can travel the U.S. It's huge.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't feel like they have to go outside of the U.S. in order to experience something different.
And plus, America's the best. It's the greatest. There's no better country.
Right. I'm just talking practically.
I am joking around.
Yeah. So practically speaking, I understand, but there's definitely a benefit to getting outside of this country and experiencing what life is like elsewhere and people's perspectives of the world outside of this country. Because let's face it, staying in one country your entire life and never going anywhere else can foster a lot of ignorance.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, the reason why I'm with you as an American is because of the kind of American you are. I think that kind of American who believes that being patriotic means you think the U.S. is better than everyone else and you can't say anything negative about its history or anything it's ever done or doing is super highly problematic.
Oh, that's the kind of American I am. Didn't you know?
I mean, I'm always entertained when Canadians meet you and they're like, are you a Trump fan? I'm like, do you guys really think I would be with one of those? Like, come on. Like, you know me? Like, how could I be with an American like that? There's no way that would ever work out for me. And we wouldn't be together if you hadn't been up to Montreal and the Canadians, Montreal Canadiens were your favorite hockey team. And that's how we ended up online starting conversation. And it's just fascinating to me that Montreal had been a city you came up to regularly to visit. And I'm like, oh, what does an American think of wanting to come to Canada and wanting to visit Canada and explore? And I mean, I think Montreal is one of the most beautiful cities in North America. I haven't been around outside of North America enough to make those kind of statements, but culture is very French here. It's one of those only cities where you're going to, maybe if I go far south enough in the U.S., I'll see signs that are just in Spanish everywhere I go, and feel like I'm in a different place. But I feel like if you're in Canada, it's one of those places where it's the laws of the land are that it's French everywhere, and so you'll really feel like you're in a European city and you're outside of North America when you're in Montreal, and it's a beautiful city. It's got a lot of old architecture and beautiful cathedrals, and there's just so many beautiful things about Montreal, and the fact that you love my city and that you would come here regularly before you ever met me kind of is beautiful to me. And I can't say that I'd been to Wildwood, New Jersey. That's where all the Quebecers go. But I hadn't, New Jersey less, but New York City was, and you're very close. You're like, our place is 20 minutes outside of Manhattan.
Yeah, 20 minutes. Wow.
No traffic. Yeah. In the middle of the night,
it's a half hour. It's a half-hour train ride. And that we can safely say is very little traffic.
Yeah. You have to take public transit and it works well. But yeah, so like, I had gone down to New York City. It was one of my favorite, mine and my daughter's favorite place to go visit. Every Canadian Thanksgiving, I would take the long weekend and visit my mom's brother who lived an hour away from New York City in Connecticut, and we would go into the city. That's what we'd spend our time doing. And so that was my favorite city and has been outside of my country for a long time, New York City. And it's just funny that Montreal was in your top city list too. And we were always traveling to right next to each other. And it's one of those weird, if you believe in fate things, and I don't necessarily that, but it's just cool. Like I look back and I'm just like, it's fascinating that when we first dated and you were first in Montreal, you'd been around my city enough to know places and to have experiences and memories to tell me about, my 30th birthday when we came up here and and I was like, it's just, I don't know. It's beautiful. It's special. Yeah. I'm thankful.
So we're married now.
We're married. This is our first podcast episode as husband. Hey, hubby.
Ew.
He hates when I call him. Actually, I think the only thing that you might hate more than hubby, being called hubby, is me being called wifey.
Being called wifey.
So now you know how to shut me up when I go hubby. Oh, man. So yeah.
Speaking of marriage.
Of getting married.
Wedding.
Yeah.
I think you had some stuff you wanted to say about our wedding.
I am happy with our wedding. I actually, on Facebook, asked people to give me their disaster stories on their wedding, just to see if there's anything I forgot that I need to do before our wedding, like by listening to people's disaster stories. And man, the stories people had of like what went wrong on their wedding was it was horrifying. And everyone was reading and adding in their own. There was just so many shock reactions on everyone's post. Like people had crazy stories. And like I look back and I'm like, everything went so smooth. And you did a great planning job, babe. Like I'm floored at how everything went so well. And I think like my biggest sadness is just the day was so beautiful and so meaningful and so overwhelmingly emotional for me that it's I feel like I couldn't take it all in at once. Just the day felt like it passed as a blur. And so when people are talking to me about stuff from my wedding, I'm appreciating the little chance to relive because it felt like everything went so quick. Some lovely examples. I mean, I could get into so many things, but I'll just try and handpick the more interesting stuff for people listening. But we got to meet some of our fellow Dauntless podcasters for the first time, people who had been our friends, who we had been in communication and community with, who we've talked to online so many times, for podcast stuff, but even just chilling and hanging. Yeah,
even just hanging out or, on our long drives between Montreal and New Jersey, hopping on the phone with at least one of these friends. So I want to say thank you to these people for their friendship and for their support of us. Yeah. So were you going to name drop? Is that what you were going to do now?
Of course we're going to name drop who our friends are. And if you're not in this list, it doesn't mean you're not our friends, but maybe we just didn't get to know you as well or as long. Like, okay, so Jessica and Scott were at our wedding. And Jessica is somebody who, you're talking about our phone friends, but like, I hate talking on the phone. Like, I am not a phone person. The only people who don't know I'm not a phone person are my best friends and you, because I talk to you guys all the time on the phone. And my sister maybe. Apart from that, like, I don't like the phone. I like to see people's facial expressions. I don't like to feel like I have to talk to someone when I don't feel ready to talk to. I don't know. Phones just scare me. Those people who are not phone people will understand me, but I remember early on when you and I started chatting before we were even dating, you were like, hey, could you call me because you want to explain something? We're having just online messenger conversations. And I remember being like, oh, I hate the phone. I don't want to do that. And I'm so glad I did.
Have to do that anyway at some point.
Well, I didn't know it was heading in the direction it was heading. No, I mean, like before we ever started dating, and I was just like this guy I've just chat with on Messenger randomly. Like, why do I have to get on a phone conversation? I don't have to get on a phone conversation.
Okay. Anyway, so our friends.
I'm getting sidetracked. I'm glad I did get on the phone conversations with you that I did, and it had me get to know you. But yeah, Jessica, she's somebody who when I'm taking my long drives down to New Jersey, I've had a lot of long conversations with her. She's somebody I consider a friend. And I think in the deconstruction world, a lot of people, are linked up with people for connection for platforming reasons or like just networking in more of I don't know, businessy kind of way, just sort of supporting each other's work.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with the networking aspect of it. There's nothing wrong. I don't think
you can't be friends with everyone.
Right, exactly. But it also, there is, I don't want to like, throw shade on people who meet with the people that we connect with online through these podcasts and other networks and communities, and meet in person for the sake of building their, whatever it is they're working on, whether it's their podcast, their books, their blogs, their, e-magazines, whatever it is that they are. I don't, doing that, meeting people for the sake of that, that's awesome. Even meeting people for the sake of just building a network, that's totally fine too. But we're not those kinds of people.
Yeah, I'm not really here to address how other people function. It's more how we function, how I function. I'm a quality over quantity kind of person. And I like to go deep in my friendships with people. And I don't have the time to I just don't have the time or energy to try and keep tabs with 1,000 different people I don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm not good at that. I have relationships where the people who are close to me know me very, very well and can address things with me when things go down because they know me well. And yeah, so it's, and I know those relationships build over time. It's not like things start off that way all the time.
Right. No, of course not.
And so it's fun. It's fun for relationships. When I think of the fun of building community outside of evangelicalism and coming out of high control religious environments, it's neat when you meet people and then you talk to them online for a while. I mean, you and I met online and had a lot of those groups in common, which, wasn't what made us start talking to each other, but we wouldn't have bumped into each other online if we didn't have mutuals from those groups in common. Right. And, you can develop, I guess I'm getting into this because it's beautiful to know that you can develop real life relationships with people, deep, meaningful friendships. And I don't mean to say if you haven't met in person, it's not a real life relationship. Those relationships, those people we met at our wedding were our real life friendships before we met live.
Yeah, even before we met them in person. Yeah.
Right. And that was why it was so exciting. And that's why they got invited to our wedding, because they were friends. Yeah. Right. There was very few people we had at our wedding who were not good friends with actually everyone knew the both of us, unless it was your cousin in Japan who had never been to North America since I've been with you, right? Like everyone else had known you, met you. There's very few exceptions in that regard, except family that lives super far.
Yeah.
And so it was special in that way. And Jessica, I just have to shout her out because when I was stressing over all the wedding planning, she was like, thinking and this is the kind of person she is and the kind of friend she's been, she's like, how can I help? And then she, I was just talking through logistics and I had a hairdresser who was doing my hair and my sisters and another one of my friends, which could only do so many people's hair. And I was like, oh, it's like my daughter. There were still other people that I didn't know how I was going to cover everyone. And I was, we had budget. We had a budget. And Jessica's like, I'm good at hair. I have a lot of daughters. I have a lot of problems with hair that I've done. And I could, if this will take some stress off you, I'll come down and I'll help you. And she was there the morning of my wedding, just so you guys understand when you're listening to an episode with us and Jessica, to understand the fun of our relationship and the person she is and the connection we have. She actually made my wedding day awesome by being there. She got my flower girl's hair done, my daughter's hair done, one of my bridesmaids, and she was helping to iron out steam out creases in my wedding dress the morning of, and just present and helpful and thoughtful. And I just so appreciated her, and I just feel really thankful that I have friends like that in my life who would come all the way from Texas to New York City to be like, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be there and to help you in any single way. And I just feel really lucky and I'm really thankful. And I was happy that we got to meet Scott. Even though we spent less time with Scott, we actually had like 3 copies of Scott's book that we wanted him to sign that never
because we
got
do.
signed.
I do plan on taking care of that at some point so that we can have a little giveaway on the podcast. But whenever it is we get around to that, might have to wait until after the holidays, just because we're swamped, and I'm sure Scott's pretty busy as well. So he's not going to have the time to deal with shipping and whatnot, but we will do what we can to get some autographed copies of Scott's book out to some of our listeners. It's a really good book. If you haven't read it yet, it's called Asian American Apostate. So this is a plug for Scott's book, as a way of saying thank you for coming and being supportive and being a part of our wedding.
That was fun. I'm happy we got to meet him in person. It's so weird when you meet someone in person, you feel like you already know them. And when you have online relationships, that's kind of the thing that happens, is you feel like you know them pretty well. And it's not like you're shocked when you meet them and you're like, who is this? You're like, oh yeah. Like it just feels like you've known them, like you've already met them, because you have, just in a different medium.
Right.
So that was cool. I think the other thing from our wedding that I wanted to say, yes, this was a tangent I wanted to go on.
Oh, before you go on that tangent, though, since we were on the topic of Jessica and her friendship and support of our wedding, we do have an upcoming episode with Jessica that we're going to be talking about. That actually is long overdue. We recorded it a long time ago, and
before our wedding.
But we recorded it before our wedding.
Before we even met her in person, right?
Right. So, and the topic of that conversation was new at the time. It's not so new now, but I think it's still worth bringing up. But it was a documentary series on Amazon Prime called Shiny Happy People. So, and Jessica grew up or was a part of that cult when she was a child. So, she came on to talk about that. So stay tuned for that episode. But just wanted to put that plug out there. And also Jessica has her own podcast called Leaving the Village, which is about her experiences in that cult that is analyzed in the documentary series. So just wanted to put that out there so that people are aware. That is who we are talking about, that very same Jessica.
That same Jessica, and if things seem like we're talking about things, I think maybe in that podcast episode, or maybe it's the Patreon extra extended edition we'll throw out later on, where we stuck around and talked about movies and talked about feminism and talked about Barbie and talked about, it shows that this was recorded during, before our wedding, because Barbie had just been fresh out, and we were talking about Asian American representation in movies. And that's going to be just exclusive to our Patreon. We're going to drop that at the same time as her episode. Her episode with us on Shiny Happy People will be available for everyone. And I think after we started cracking out the whiskey and drinking and talking about Barbie, that's our tipsy conversation will be just for our Patreons, where we just unload. But we had a lot of good movie suggestions if you want to get into good Asian movies. We talked a lot about feminism and women representation. And Jessica had mentioned, I will say that she had mentioned in that Patreon episode, a documentary. No, it wasn't a documentary. It was based on it was a movie based loosely on an actual cult. And
it was based on a book that was, the book itself was very loosely based on the events that took place within this other Mennonite cult.
Called the Manitoba something or other. Mm-hmm. But basically the movie, it was called Women Talking. And she gave a huge plug for how great it was. And again, that'll be available to our Patreons, but she talks about our patrons on Patreon. Got to get this all straight in my head. Some of you understand the tongue twisterness of all that. But yeah, so she was going on about it. And then it's funny because recently we sat down and actually watched it. And I don't remember even that episode that we had recorded where Jessica was telling us about how amazing it was. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to put that on our list. And you tell people I'm putting it on the list, but you don't have a written list and you never get back to anything on that list. Well, we accidentally got back to that list without even realizing it. And then we were listening to her commentary on it. And I was like, that was great. And it was even more fun after we'd actually watched it. And I would give a plug for Women Talking. If you're into watching movies that are intense that are powerfully done on just cult-related stuff and what it looks like to exit out, high control authoritarian groups. I think a lot of our listeners might be able to identify with it. Obviously, it's more extreme because it's and the topic's really hard. I would Google it and get a summary before you get into it.
There's like all sorts of trigger warnings for that movie. So approach with caution. I think it's very, very tastefully done, but the material, the content is very, very heavy. It's a very difficult topic. So it might be a good idea to go ahead and read a synopsis before diving into the movie itself.
As a Canadian, I did not realize that the person who put that movie together, the producer, is Sarah Polley, who is very well known in Canada. She was like one of the main characters on Road to Avonlea. Again, Canadian TV show. All Canadians will know what I'm talking about. Americans will be like, maybe some of you might know. I don't know. But I didn't know till after the fact that she was actually the one behind that. Another strong Canadian woman presence. I always have to shout those things out. It's my Canadian pride coming through. But yeah, I recommend that. What else have we been do we want to get into what we watched? We'll get back to what we'll get back
to that. We'll make that.
I want to go back to the wedding stuff. Before I lose my train of thought on that. Yes. Were you finished your thought before I got into mine, Nate?
No. Yes, I was.
Yes. Okay.
I think so. Continue. Just
okay.
Go ahead.
Continue. All right. So I don't know how many of you find weddings to be triggering or just highly stressful, or like you come into them and your whole body just starts reacting to the fear of what's coming because you've gone through enough evangelical weddings. I mean, I've attended a lot of evangelical weddings in all my years of being evangelical, but also I did wedding photography for a long time. So I've been behind the camera in weddings that I wasn't attending, but just sort of attending as a photographer. Like I've just been to a lot of evangelical weddings and they've been horrible. Like on my end, they've been awful. I think for any woman who's been divorced or anyone who's not straight, or I'm trying to think of all the different situations where I feel
single people. As a single person, I hated going to weddings.
Christian weddings can be, in particular, because I can contrast like the non-Christian weddings I've been to.
Oh, absolutely. And, I remember I went to, I think it was a Hindu wedding as a single person, and I had a blast. It was so much fun. I didn't feel inferior in any way, but I've been to so many evangelical weddings as a single person, especially if you go as a single person without a date. It just feels so isolating and uncomfortable, and you feel inferior. You feel like a second-class citizen at these things.
What would you like if somebody's never been to evangelical weddings and they're listening? What would be like the examples of how weird it gets and like the stuff that's so evangelical at weddings, like that you probably might not get outside of evangelicalism? It just ends up tied into the whole thing, and I think evangelicals don't even notice it goes on because it's just so part of the culture and so common for these things to happen.
Yeah, there's
like what makes you uncomfortable as a single person.
Yeah, there's this assumption that you are. The message of he who findeth a wife findeth a good thing, or, and favor with God, right? So, they
don't quote from Paul that it's better to be single,
right?
And only get married if you're an inferior person, right, so that you're not burning with lust. So just get married if you're weak and you can't handle it.
Well,
they don't preach that.
No,
part of
but
Paul.
they will talk about how you need to get married. Because they do at least some of the weddings that I've been to might refer to that passage, but not talk about how that's a weak, the weak thing to do, but instead put it in there as, all men burn with lust. That's just who we are as men. Therefore, you need to get married. All men need to get married so that they stop sinning and burning with lust.
So we basically help fix your beast gross monster,
the inner
the inner horribleness of men. Mm-hmm. Women are there to, your marriage is going to fix that problem.
Yeah, exactly. Ugh. And so so there's that sense of you're broken because you're just completely governed by your lusts, but you have no outlet for them. The only healthy, safe outlet for it is marriage, and therefore get married because you're going to remain a broken, lust-filled person. So women get to be the objects of just being penis receptacles. I don't even know how to word it way. Like we're there to
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's
fix
what Mark
you.
Driscoll would say. And then there's also the messaging. I mean, you know, as a guy, that's what I heard, or that's how I felt about, you know, attending these weddings. There's always that sense of, you know, like I was saying, you know, the passage, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and favor with God. And so in order to have favor with God, right, like this is sort of the logical steps that you start to go down mentally. In order to find favor with God, you need to find a wife. And so you are out of favor with God if you aren't actively pursuing marriage. So that is the logical next step for you. You can't just be single and be happy. You have to be miserable as a single person, because you need, your singleness is only for
you haven't found the good thing
right?
yet.
Exactly. I remember I was actually watching a YouTube channel. There's this atheist YouTube channel hosted by a woman named Emma Thorne, and she had stumbled on I don't know if you're aware of Girl Defined, but it's this pair of sisters. They're ultra conservative. And
that's bringing back some memory. Maybe.
Yeah, and they kind of feed off of each other with this really
it's like super awkward
homeschooly type vibes.
Okay.
But they like to talk about relationships. So, well, one of them has released a sex course for women, one for married women and one for single women. And it's biblical, you know. Following biblical norms for sex and relationships. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is what she mentioned. So she saw that they talk about the season of singleness, so on and so forth. How to make your season of singleness a success, or something along those lines. Treating singleness like a season, like it's not. You
got to weather the storm. You just got to get through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway,
you're in like the desert, and you got to get into the.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the that's a long tangent, but yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the messaging for women, because I want to speak to that. When we're talking about Paul, you know, the passages of Paul that I often hear at weddings that I find disgusting, are the passages about, you know, wives submitting. And it's, you know, even though there's Paul, and I love the idea of, and our reverend said this at our wedding, you know, Paul was had very conflicting messages. And it's true, because, you know, in one verse you have submit one to another, and then you have wives submit to your husbands, and you can get into the original and see that actually that word was added in by translators. And there's so many side conversations about how the Bible's been put together and how patriarchy has influenced all of that. And I have my thoughts on how the Bible itself has some patriarchal messaging, which is not a popular take by people who just want to imagine that, no, like patriarchy is not a biblical thing. And they do a lot of Bible benevolence. And I'll just give credit to that term for Jill. Her full name is not coming to me, but Straight White American Jesus has an episode with her called The Good Book. It's her book. Anyway, I'm rambling on, and I want to get back on the path. But basically, that idea of submission that Paul brings up, I have sat through weddings where women are just being told to submit.
Quick, just so that we can put it in there. Her name is Dr. Jill Hicks Keaton.
Thank you, Nate.
She's the associate professor of religious studies at the University of Oklahoma, and
I'm glad he's Googling in the
book,
background.
The book is entitled Good Book: How White Evangelicals Save the Bible to Save Themselves. Okay.
It is a fascinating topic, how white evangelicals save the Bible to save themselves. And it's made me rethink of the whole concept of inerrancy and what is the point of it? Why does it function the way it does? What is it trying to achieve? And essentially just holds up a lot of white guys and their authority. And that's the point of trying to preserve that concept of the Bible that does have a lot of things in it that are harmful towards women. And when people are like, yeah, but Jesus was revolutionary towards women. And I used to say that all the time. And it's true. There are some passages where Jesus says and does things that are even things that can be perceived as harmful to women, like talking about, like I've had people throw the passages of divorce at me being like, you know, Jesus said God hates divorce. And then all you need is a tiny bit of brain power. Like for these patriarchal men throwing this at women in abusive relationships, which I had done to try and shut me down from the idea of leaving a bad marriage. Just a small amount of digging. And it's like, did women have legal rights to pursue a divorce? No. Then they were not the person this passage was addressed to. Oh, it was addressed to men. Men were being told not to divorce. Well, why? And how would that affect women? Oh, let's see. Men were divorcing women whenever they didn't get whatever they wanted. And so they were using divorce as a threat to leave women destitute, because in that society that was patriarchal, women who were not married or who were divorced were stigmatized, or who couldn't provide for themselves, or, were dependent on men. So Jesus was actually looking out for women in that passage. And so I think there are some things that are looked at in scripture as, look, Jesus is being mean. And it's actually the opposite. He's advocating for women. But then there are other passages, and that's where I used to land as a progressive Christian for a big chunk of time. But then you do a tiny bit of digging and you come across a passage where, a woman is asking Jesus to heal their child, and he starts talking about them and comparing them to a dog. And the woman starts pushing back on him, and eventually she gets what she wants, and Jesus changes his mind and changes his course, and he's actually challenged by her. But Jesus was wrong. Like his approach to her, and I think that book, The Good Book, and I haven't read it, but listening to her talk about the damage done to women when we try and defend patriarchal bullshit in the Bible, when we don't acknowledge that there is patriarchy in the Bible, and she talks about Bible benevolence being that act of trying to make the Bible good. And I don't want to give it all away. But yeah, anyway, all that to say, people sometimes don't want to look at the uglier parts of scripture and admit that it's not all great. Slaves submit to your masters not only when they're good to you, but also when they're cruel and nasty. That's in the New Testament. It's not the Old Testament. It's there. And some of the ways Jesus spoke to women was great. And other times Jesus had some work to do. And I know if you grew up evangelical, you're not allowed to think that. You're not allowed to consider that. But it's nice to be in a place where I could be honest about the impact of scripture and how it gets used and how it's been used throughout history. And it's something I'm very passionate about, something I've been thinking a lot about. And yeah, I've been sitting through weddings my whole life, evangelical weddings, where women are told these become soapboxes for evangelical takes on relationships. And a lot of them are really harmful, whether it's telling women that they're secondary in their relationship. They're there to serve their husbands, and they keep hounding on about the order of everything, the order of creation, and the order men are the ones created first, and they're the heads of the house. And there's a lot of that talk, down to shaming women for getting divorced. Conversations on divorce within marriage and weddings I've seen have been awful. I've sat through and listened to stuff that has just, in the situation that I've come out of, just been gross to sit and listen to. And so all of that to say, when we were planning our wedding, and I didn't even touch on queer people and what that looks like in evangelical weddings, but they definitely get lots of hits, But marriage was created for one man and one woman, and this is God's intention. Basically, evangelicals use weddings like they use funerals just to kind of plug the dogma, to use out those really high points, those really those big traditions where people are emotional and where they're big events, meaningful events, ones that get you very reflective, and they use those to hammer home the dogma, whether it's against queer people, whether it's against women, single people. Oh, it's endless. It's endless. And when we were getting married, I remember thinking of how many friends that I know who've been harmed by church, who've been sat through weddings and feel anxious even coming into a church and hearing a wedding, like what it would trigger. So we thought carefully through the messaging of our wedding. We're in an inclusive, affirming church where queer people lead or in leadership, and it's been healing for me to sit in the pews besides other queer people. And I think there's still a lot to be learned from marginalized communities when it comes to liberation theology, queer theology. I am not down with white evangelicalism, but I think we shouldn't lump all of the Christians who are not white evangelical in with. We shouldn't link up the marginalized groups who've been harmed by white evangelical Christians in with the ones who are doing hard work, who have healthy messaging. And I think you can acknowledge how Christianity has been harmful overall as a religion, and still acknowledge that there are people within from marginalized communities that are adding a lot of value and providing a lot of safe communities for people and doing a lot of good. And I'm thankful for the community that we've been a part of. It's a UCC church. Our Reverend has been phenomenal. And I also don't think everyone needs to be in church. So I don't want anyone listening to think that I'm trying to say, just find a good church. No, I think it's not for everyone. And we're very privileged to have a place that is a safe community, because I don't think most Christian communities are very safe.
Yeah, and honestly, even in progressive Christian spaces, there's we often hear people talking about how, you exit evangelicalism, but you're bringing evangelical attitudes with you, even if you're leaving behind evangelical dogma and belief systems.
And that's true.
And some of those actions and practices can find their way into progressive Christian circles and progressive churches.
I want to get into that.
Yeah, you want to get into that?
Can I put a pin in that? But because I wanted to say some other stuff first. But can we get back to that?
Okay.
To what evangelicals carry with them outside?
Mm-hmm.
That's a conversation that I do want to get into today.
Yeah.
But just going back to the wedding, and just to summarize my point of where I was going with that, I'm in a healthy community, but I don't say that to say go find one. I don't think, even if you had a healthy Christian community near you, you might be done with Christianity. That's valid. Part of not being evangelical is I don't feel everyone needs to be in church. I don't feel like if you didn't find another community, there's something wrong with you. I've left that behind. And I think being an atheist is legit. But I'm also not here to shit on people who are in a marginalized community who still have some sort of Christian practice, faith, whatever it may be, unless they're harming people. And if that's the case, I will always have words for that and have stuff to say against it, and I won't shut up. But for our wedding, I was thinking very much of the people I know who've been a part of my evangelical background, and who need to hear this messaging, who maybe are on the side of the people who preach these kind of harmful messages and need to hear a challenge because they only surround themselves by people who agree with how they think. People who might have come from that space. And then others who have sat through and been harmed and damaged in churches. And I was really thankful to have those conversations with people afterwards, and for people to bring that up to me, because it wasn't something I set out to do in our wedding, was to allow people to be challenged and to be comforted if they have been harmed in churches, to be validated for who they are, whether they're single or whether they're queer, whether they are marginalized in any other way. I mean, we talked about how you and I, once upon a time the U.S. not a long time ago would not be allowed to get married, right? Like, people paved the way for you and I as an interracial couple to get married. And Christians have landed on the wrong side of that in history. That's a reality in the U.S. So we just felt the need to stand up for other marginalized communities as well. And so where was I going with all that? I'm thankful because I have heard some people talk to me afterwards about how they just attended an evangelical wedding that was traumatizing, and they were headed into another, and sitting there and hearing in a church, and I think that's what I get out of my church community, because a lot of my beliefs are sort of like much more agnostic category. Like, the faith stuff is very hard to resonate with me, but I think looking around me and in this building, hearing gay people affirmed, hearing hearing all the opposites messaging has been healing for me deep down inside of me. So I was glad to be able to invite people into my space to feel what that's like. And if you are a part of our Patreon, I'm going to throw up not our entire wedding. I probably won't put our vows into there. So there's a lot of personal stuff, but I'll put the sermon in, and I'll put my friend who spoke and our reverend, and just the overall messaging of our wedding, in case you also have never heard some counter messaging, in case you have been in a wedding recently or attending one where you have felt traumatized. I wanted to for those of you who support us and who are our patrons, I wanted to throw you something and give you a gift and share some of our wedding with you. And I'm really excited with how that went. And it still makes me smile, and it still makes me happy to know, that we were able, me and you, our personalities are very much that we don't shut up when injustices around us happen. We like speaking about it. That's why we're podcasters. And before we ever started podcasting, you and I have read each other rants back and forth that we've written on Facebook, on blogs. Like, we've always been like this, the two of us, before we ever met each other. So our wedding was very much just a reflection of who we are and the kinds of things that are important to us. And so throwing a shout out to our patrons. Go enjoy that. We'll put that into our It
might be a little while because that requires a little bit of video editing. So
we'll get there.
To sit down and do that. But we've got some stuff that we're going to be dropping into our Patreon. So yeah, so sign up. It's just $5 a month, and you get access to this stuff. Now, granted, we will always make our main podcast absolutely free. Like that's never like I don't ever want to create that system of like, teasing people or trying to get you to sign up for Patreon in order to get access to anything that we do or talk about normally. But some of the stuff that doesn't fall into our normal conversations, or some of the excess that might not be all that fun unless you're like close to us or as well, or you are very, very interested, we might throw that into our Patreon. So yeah. But we for those of you who do support us on Patreon, thank you. Like we don't often say thank you enough. But yes, thank you.
Some of you have been a part of that, even though we're dropping nothing in there on the regular, and you just support us. And that's really what that is for. It's not so you can have bonus this and that. It's like just your way of saying, hey, we have the funds and we want to support you in what you're doing. And we know that you have bills to pay related to making this podcast that you're using this for, and we want to help you. And for you, we say thanks because that makes a difference for the two of us.
Yeah.
I think that was all I wanted to say about the wedding stuff. Mm-hmm. Are you done with the wedding stuff?
I'm done with the wedding stuff.
I'm done with the wedding stuff.
But since we were plugging ways to support us, another way that you can support us if you can't support us on Patreon, we totally understand. One way that
Money's
you can
tight.
support us is by sharing and reviewing our podcast on iTunes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We really, really one of the best ways to help spread the word about our show is to rate and review us on iTunes. Those 5-star reviews or 5-star ratings go a long way towards,
or Spotify.
Yeah, getting us out there. Spotify as well. Yeah.
I think on our website, can people leave?
Yeah, you can leave reviews on our website, and that's helpful as well. Though not quite as helpful as leaving ratings and reviews on iTunes and Spotify. Though if you write a review on iTunes, it will show up on our website automatically. So,
yeah, and this wasn't in our notes. Me and Nate kind of jotted down some bullet points before we got talking, but. We had a situation recently where I posted something that went viral on Full Mutuality, and basically we got a whole bunch of nasty messages, and some people who came to leave reviews just don't really follow our stuff, but they were just really angry at what I put up. And guys and girls, what I put up, I have to say what I put up because I think it ties into so much of what we do. But I put a Leonard Cohen quote, and he said, "Why don't women hurry up and take over the world already?" Something to that effect. You can look it up. It's a Leonard Cohen quote. It's out there. By the way, he's also a Montrealer, for those who have to do the plugs. I'm sorry. I love my city. Very popular, well-known Montrealer. But Leonard Cohen, wrote that, and I just shared it. I should put it up on our website, and it went viral, and then it got shared by thousands of people. And then in came all the incels, all the man-hating groups must have shared it around in some of theirs because and the messages we got to our inbox, to me, this vulgar, sexual, gross. I won't even repeat some of the stuff these guys were saying to me. But, I guess it was eye-opening to me. I don't think we've ever gotten such an onslaught at once of inbox messages and reviews, negative reviews. So if you wanted to counterbalance that with, because you've been appreciating what we're doing, we do appreciate that. Those of you who actually listen to us, because I think some people see something they don't like, something we challenge them on. They haven't listened to anything we've done. They haven't even listened to our podcast, and they'll go write a review of something just screw you guys, because they're angry. And so for those who do enjoy us, please feel free to go rate us. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I guess the takeaway I had from the Leonard Cohen quote and why I'm bringing it up is, it was a reminder to me on allyship, because I speak out from my perspective and my life experience as a woman on how I'm treated. And it never gets the amount of venom and anger that post got. And I think when a man decides that he's going to betray the patriarchy and speak out, it creates a certain level of a stir and a certain level of anger among men who are toxic and harmful. And I say that because sometimes we don't realize I think as allies, sometimes we don't think we can make a difference, or we don't realize the impact. When guys stand up for women, they might not think it makes much of a difference. But when I watched that reaction, I realized one man talking about how he wants to see women in charge made guys go nuts at a way that they would never get angry if I, as a woman, made the same statement. And I see that in other communities, other minority communities, where if you're speaking out for your own community, people say, oh, you're using the race card, or you're using the victim card, or like they kind of talk down to you like, oh, you're just saying this because you want to be privileged, when really they are the privileged group that's talking down to you, telling you that you need to stop speaking out. But when you are from a privileged group, if you're a man, if you're white, and you speak out towards your own, I think that is very hard for people to listen to when they are being toxic, because it really challenges them on a different core level. And I just want to encourage you, if you are white, when you see your white family member being racist, just, say so. Speak out, challenge it. It's going to have a certain impact coming from you. And if you are a man and you are listening to another man say something harmful and you say something, it's going to really aggravate that man, because there's a policing of what manhood should be that goes on, right? Where it's like, this is what a real man is and this is what a man can't be. And when you as a man decide, nope, I don't subscribe to your version of manhood. Nope, I don't agree with patriarchy. Nope, I think women leading is fantastic and I wish women would take over sooner. It's very frustrating to men who are very harmful towards women, who think very little of women and want women to shut up. Having guys support women is frustrating to those toxic types. So I just want to give a plug to guys who do stand up. I mean, there's some guys who jumped into the comments even on that post and challenged and pushed back, and I appreciated that. But yeah, keep. I just want to encourage people to keep. If you're in a privileged group and you feel a little bit like you can't do anything, that's not true, and your voice actually does make a difference. And you have a lot of clout in order to push back on those systems, and you should.
This is Hallie in Salem, Oregon, and you're listening to Full Mutuality.
Have you seen the Amazon Prime docuseries, Shiny Happy People? Were you shocked to hear the wholesome American Duggar family was involved in a cult?
A cult full of abuse, sex, and religious trauma. A cult that claimed to educate children and planned to use them to take over the world. Have you wished you could sit down with an IBLP survivor and hear more of the story?
Join hosts Jessica Goforth and Alexis Gray on Leaving the Village, a podcast by IBLP survivors centering their lived experiences and shining a light on all the hidden torment and harm they endured growing up in the cult shown on the groundbreaking docuseries.
We have exclusive interviews with cast members where we laugh and cry and go behind the scenes with them as we discuss our shared experiences.
If watching the documentary left you wanting more, check out Leaving the Village on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on your favorite podcast platform. Hey everyone, I'm Jessica from the Leaving the Village podcast. I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for tuning into this show. We're so grateful that you've decided to spend your time with us. Seriously, Dan, Gail, Kathleen, Nate, Scott, and the rest of us here at the Dauntless Media Collective couldn't produce content like the show you're listening to without your support. I'd also like to invite you even further into the conversation. Right now, there are some great discussions happening over in the Dauntless Media Collective Discord server. If you're interested in chatting with other folks who are deconstructing and decolonizing the oppressive traditions they came from, please feel free to hop onto the server. If you don't know what Discord is, it's a place where communities can gather online for chatting on a wide variety of topics. In our Discord server, we have channels devoted to general deconstruction conversations, some meme sharing, therapeutic venting about whatever religious bullshit you're currently dealing with, and even a channel specifically devoted to talking about the latest episode of the podcast you're listening to right now. I hope you'll join us. You can log in directly to the Dauntless server by clicking on the link in the show notes or heading to dauntless.fm and clicking on the link in the top banner. See you there.
There is one topic that's definitely dominating world news right now. And, you know, it's interesting because we got married October 8th. And I was kind of out of the loop on what was going on because leading up to our wedding, we were just crazy busy. And then, you catch little flickers in your news feed of what's going on in the world. And then, after things settled down, we got back from our honeymoon, you start really digging into what's happening in the world and understanding what is, and so you probably all know exactly where I'm going with this. But day before our wedding, Hamas did their terror attack, and it was disgusting. What they did was awful. And yeah, I mean, that's just a reality of, like, I don't have any buts to add on to that. Terrorist attacks are disgusting, and the Jews did not deserve that. The Jewish people and the Palestinian people don't deserve terrorism. So that happened the day before our wedding, and then the retaliation towards the Palestinian people. Of course, under the guise from the Israeli government that they're rooting out Hamas, has displaced millions of Palestinians and, just caused absolute horrendous, genocide is I'm just going to be plain what's happening. And, you come out of evangelicalism and people are very, whose side are you on? And there's no nuance, and there's no, somebody has to be bad guy and somebody has to be a good guy, and you're either anti-Semitic or you're anti-Palestinian, and like you're one thing or the other, and you can't care about everyone. You have to pick a side, and you have to like just live in that. And I think you can be for everyone. You can want Palestinians to live in safety and care about the Jewish people and not want them to have terrorist attacks. You can do both of those things. And I won't elaborate too much on this. I mean, I could probably go on for a long time. I will say my thoughts and opinions very much reflect white, straight American Jesus. Bradley Onishi and Dan Miller did an episode on Palestine and Israel on a weekly roundup recently. Look for their episode in December that they did on a weekly roundup, and it just says that Palestine, Israel, and the U.S. And I think they really did a good job fleshing out the topic. So I don't want to go on too much about it. I'm bringing it up because it's happening in the world. And sometimes if someone doesn't say something, you can easily jump to conclusions that they don't care to speak out about something, that they don't care what's going on in the world. Silence can be interpreted as you don't care. And I've been on that side of things where I've watched, I've been in a situation where I'm being harmed, or I've watched others being harmed, and the people who should speak up go quiet on it because they don't want to be caught in any crossfires, or they just don't want to take the heat of what it means to stand up. So I do want to say something because it is important. I think when there's genocide going on in the world, we do need to say something. And you can love Jewish people and be upset about what the Israeli government is doing right now. And you can understand, I need to add this in. This, again, Straight White American Jesus covers all of these in much more detail. But I mean, as Americans, this should be very obvious. How many people voted for Trump? Not the majority. Not even the popular vote went to Trump. And even at that, if you take into consideration how many people didn't vote, if only 60% of people voted and then Trump got like 40-something%, that means really like what? He has 30% or less of the actual people in the U.S. supporting him?
Potentially. I mean, the numbers, you don't know how many people abstained that might have voted Republican anyway. So
give or take, right? But I mean, it's less than how many votes he got, right? If he got 40% of the popular vote, that's even less when you take into all look at people who didn't vote. So I'm just saying that to say that if you can live in a country like the U.S. and see a government going against so many people, like majority of people who live there do not agree with steps, decisions, language, political, everything, right? That's happened in the past. Then you could see that happens in other countries too, and accept that, a government does not speak for all of its people. How a government performs and acts and behave doesn't speak for all of its people. It's not representative of all Jewish people, what the Israeli government does. And that needs to be kept in view because people do retaliate by bombing synagogues and showing anti-Semitism when they can't make that distinction, between the Israeli government and the Jewish people, and so stuff to keep in mind. And I encourage people, I'm going to make a plug, go check out that episode of Straight White American Jesus. Very informative, very thoughtful on this topic. And I don't want to take up, I guess, I feel like other people have covered this better than I could. And I wanted to give my thoughts anyway.
Yeah. I'm going to add in just as a springboard off of that, speaking of genocide, I know this topic isn't in our notes, but it is sort of relevant. And I feel like this could be taken as hyperbole, but if you look at any studies about and definitions for genocide and the steps that it takes to get to what we often think of in public discourse as genocide, currently we are in the early stages of a genocide attempt on trans people in the world, in the US, but in particular in the UK. There's a lot of rhetoric going on in the UK among people in positions of power and leadership that are targeting trans people in that country. And a lot of the same sort of rhetoric has been going on here. Let's be honest. The US is known for its vitriolic anger towards trans people. And I think it's important to mention that, you know, these are things that are happening in our world. People's lives are in danger, and, you know, entire communities are on the verge of being wiped out. And there's violence being enacted against trans people. So,
yep, super important. And if you are a cis person, yeah, if it doesn't affect you because you don't have a kid who's cis, or there's no kid who's trans, or someone in your life that you love who's trans, take the time to care and love your neighbor, even if you are not dealing with the issues that they're dealing with. Love one another. I don't even know how else to motivate people to care, but like, a lot of us are very privileged, and we don't have ourselves constantly being threatened for being ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what else did you want to talk about?
What else? What's going on? We did the world at large. Mm-hmm. What about what's going on in the deconstruction community? I don't know. That feels like a big can of worms.
There's always something going on, and yeah, it is a big can of worms. But you know, you were and, you mentioning.
Know, I don't want to address specific people or situations, but I do, and I guess, and part of that is I'm not here to tell people, like, I don't like this person because they said this and you shouldn't follow them, or this one. Like, I don't want to do, you know what, love who you want to love, enjoy who you want to love, but I do want to address problematic things. So instead of addressing people or events, I don't know, maybe we can get into, you know, the problems that we see happening. So maybe we can talk a bit about the deconstruction community at large and patterns, things we see happening around us. I mean, you brought it up before, you know, when people leave evangelical spaces and they walk into progressive ones, they can often take a lot of evangelical, you know, ideas with them. So I guess I wanted to just
more specific.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because they might leave some of those ideas behind, but they are bringing with them practices and habits.
Yeah, and I think it's important to discuss, how do we make it look different than what we came out of? So I think we need to ask those questions, like, what are the patterns people tend to repeat? What are the things we need to be, if we're coming out of a place that tells us how to think? I mean, I feel like I'm already giving a point. critical thinking, okay? Like, I'm not here to tell you who to follow, like, or whatever. Like, I'm not going to do that. But I do want to help provoke critical thinking. And I think that's the kind of stuff that needs to happen. So what are the things that what are the patterns that people do tend to repeat? What are the traps that we fall into when we come out of evangelical spaces?
Oh, you're asking? That's not rhetorical?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, audience, you can sit with that. But Nate, thoughts? I always have so many thoughts on this, but what comes to your mind?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the cult followings are very, still very common. There are, you know, thought leaders, quote unquote, in the progressive Christian spaces, in the ex-evangelical spaces, that can garner a following, and a rabid following at that, and they will react to any kind of criticism the same way that evangelical pastors react to criticism on their Facebook pages and or their, you know, their social media or whatever platforms they're involved in. They are the gatekeepers of all of this information that they have. There's a lot of plagiarism that continues. I mean, you know, a lot of pastors tended to steal sermons and sermon illustrations from people that they are in community with. Often they would steal from women. And there's a lot of that still continuing in ex-evangelical spaces as well. I see a lot of these guys with big followings posting these images with some pithy statement that's supposedly inspirational from an ex-evangelical point of view, and then they'll stick their name on it. But they didn't come up with that. They grabbed that from someone else. And then anybody who calls them out, their followers will go after them like flying monkeys. So the cult following is very common. I think that's
and
still...
the cult of I'm going to just say it, the cult of white men is extremely popular even in deconstruction and in ex-evangelical spaces. Is just white men will still garner a lot more support and followers, and that's it. It's literally because they're white men, and we've been trained to put our support behind people who look like this, and that gets taken out and continues. Like, I'll see women of color, I'll see men of color, white women, anyone who's not a white man saying stuff that's way better, and the white guy, if he says he'd work half as hard and say half as much, and and often even that pattern of that white male pastor who has people of those other communities doing the work for him, and then he passes it off as his own, still ends up being a thing in these spaces. It still is a lot of other people putting him in the work, but their white man face is still the one speaking out. Other people, and the other people are not always getting credited for it and are working behind the scenes, to make the difference. And so there's that piece just grieves me to know that people do carry those kind of things with them when they leave those spaces. Have a hard time opening up to seeing a black woman's face, or a trans person, or anyone who's not that white cis men up front, telling them how to think and what to pay attention to. And I wish that's something that we could change in these spaces. And it's hard to see the cult followings that kind of repeat the exact same patterns. And you're right, the gatekeeping that happens, the deleting anyone who challenges you on your thoughts. And I'm okay with deleting stuff on your page when people come to troll you, or but if people have legitimate, I'm thankful for people who have pushed back on different things that I've said. And unless people have, like, if people are not picking on a marginalized community, and sometimes someone writes something on my page and I don't understand what they're trying to say, and I'll just leave it alone and not comment because I don't, or maybe I disagree, but I still want them to be allowed to speak their thoughts that different from mine. I definitely, if I see someone commenting about how all Christianity is terrible and atheism is the only way, that feels very evangelical to me, when you're like, the only way now to do it is just to hate all things Christian. Like, it's all bad, it's all evil. But I usually leave it alone in the sense that Christianity as a whole has caused a lot of harm. And I think if you are in any healthy Christian spaces, you can acknowledge that. Otherwise, I'm sus of where you're really coming from. But I think that, being extreme in one way, or like, this is the exact way you have to believe now, I don't even engage those usually. I leave it alone, and I understand what the kind of pain and harm that's been done in the name of Christianity. So even if I don't agree, I rarely will, unless it's someone with a huge, massive following and they're ignoring, queer Christians. And it's rare that someone comes on my page to say how all Christianity sucks. I'm not going to be like, but,
Right.
But if someone comes on to attack women as a whole, to put racist crap, they're gonna get deleted and banned. Like, I'm not here to say yes, everyone's opinion is equally valid, and you can just come spout off any of the nonsense that harms people on my page. No, but what I'm trying to address is,
because we're also, sorry, real quick, I want to be able to cultivate community and pages and things, content that is at the very least a step towards safe for marginalized communities, particularly for queer people, for trans people, for gay, bi, lesbian. Like, these are people that we care to be able to feel safe or feel like they can be heard on our pages. And when others show up with blatantly transphobic talking points, whether or not those people espousing those points think they are transphobic or not, when that stuff shows up, we are obviously going to be coming down hard with the ban hammer on those kinds of comments, because that's the sort of stuff that we won't tolerate. But yeah, if you're like you were just saying, Gail, like if you're coming out with a particular opinion that we may or may not agree with, or you feel strongly that, like, you know, all religion is bad, like as long as you're not blasting anybody or causing, you know, arguments, like causing a lot of drama, then yeah, we'll probably just leave it alone. Yeah. Anyway,
we don't have to all think the same on everything, and that's not my point with people trying to gatekeep. It's more like, you got a massive platform, you're causing harm to a marginalized group. That marginalized group starts telling you, hey, this is problematic. And your response is delete, 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 ban, delete. Anyone who doesn't, and the people calling you out, you're the privileged one, and the ones who are marginalized are telling you, and you don't want to hear it. That is when, yeah, you're the gatekeeper, and we're repeating those evangelical patterns. That does go on in the deconstruction community often enough, and
yeah,
it's discouraging. And I want to bring this up because I think when we leave evangelical spaces, we feel like we're going to finally be with like-minded people. We finally feel like, now this is a safe place. You know, that the other place wasn't safe. I'm going to enter into a safer place. And there's a lot of narcissistic pastors, and there's a lot of people out there in the evangelical community looking for traumatized people to build themselves and use for their purposes. There are the same types of people that hang out in deconstruction spheres, looking to make profit off of people, looking to build their own, you know, platforms off of harmed people who've been traumatized from the evangelical communities that they've come out of, and who will use and chew up and abuse. And I found that out kind of quickly when I entered into deconstruction spaces, but it still makes me sad every time I see a new iteration of it happening. Like it's always very discouraging to watch that thing go on. And I've seen it happen often enough that there's a piece of me that's like, oh, deconstruction community, you know, but also at the same time, I'm a part of that. So, you know, when people do the whole deconstruction, you know, I don't want to talk about that forever. And I'm going to be beyond, I'm so beyond that. Like, I want to heal and just never talk about that again. Yeah, I mean, for me, just speaking for myself, it's always going to be a part of my background, and I'm not ashamed of that. It's going to come up randomly throughout the rest of my life at different times. And I don't think healing is linear. I don't think you get to a finish line in your healing. I think things resurface over the course of our life. If we've grown up in our most formative years, we're full of indoctrination and brainwashing, that's not just going to pop off at some point. And I think the quicker we can accept that, the more we can move into an idea of healing that's trauma-informed and that understands the way our nervous systems work, our bodies that might respond to this, even when our minds catch up with understanding and undoing some of the wrong ways of looking at things. That physiologically, I mean, when you've been conditioned a certain way from childhood, stuff is still going to affect you. Mm-hmm. You know, you're going to hear a Christian song in a store and get shivers, or like be in certain environments and just want to bolt, you know, and that's even if you've been out of there for a really long time. And I'm saying that because I think patterns evangelicals can bring out is the perfectionism, is this image that you have to have of being perfect, of complete healing, of getting to this finish line. I have run the good race. I have finished I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith, or what. Mm-hmm. Like this idea of this race, this marathon that you're going to cross over the finish line. You're going to be the great one. And it's a lot more, life is just a lot more messy than that. Yeah. So I think.
And there's only one great one, and his name is Wayne Gretzky. So, you know.
I didn't know where you were going with that. I was a little bit worried. Oh man. Yeah. So I guess those are some of the pitfalls that I see. I mean, we talked a little about Palestine and Israel, about binary thinking, and I did have a thought on that. I've noticed among privileged people, especially white people, among my own, there tends to be a tendency to have a pushback against, like, so I agree that binary thinking is dangerous and bad. But I think you can be binary in your thought about binary thinking. Try and follow me. I don't know if this makes any sense, right? But like, if you are like, black and white is bad, the only thing that counts is gray now. Like, gray is the only way to be. You can never be black. Never be black and white. Never. You hear that? Never? It is still the black and white thinking. It is that fear of ever. And I've seen this among white people, of being told something is wrong. And I think in a lot of situations in life, they are much more complex. And we've been told this is bad. And then we've learned that they were wrong and that actually what they called bad was good or fine or acceptable. And so we just become weary of being told, it's this fear over cancel culture. It's a fear over being told anything in a very definitive sort of a way. And I think that could be very binary in and of itself. If you're going to be more nuanced, then understand maybe most situations in life are complicated. Most, but not all.
Right,
right. Not all. Like if we're going to talk about racism, if we're going to talk about sexism, if we're going to, there are times to hit ban and delete. There are times to be done with something, to not give room for it. There are times to speak out harshly on certain things. When people are dying, when there's genocide, there are times where you need to be coming down on something without being tiptoey about it and gentle and nuanced. And like some things are straightforward. If you are harming someone, even if the situations around it are complex, you can say genocide is evil. You can say racism is bad. You can say sexism.
And I think, the environments that we came out of taught us certain things, taught us very black and white truths about certain things, right? Like, so black and white truth, Jesus died for your sins. And, if you don't believe in Jesus, you are going to hell for all eternity, right? So, then we walk out of those spaces and we when, for instance, the Bible, Jesus, the gospel, that's the only way to salvation. That's the only true spiritual path. Then we leave those ideas and spaces and we begin to develop maybe a sense of pluralism, right? And we want to engage with faith language that's different from the language that we came from, and we see beauty in all of these various spiritual conversations that are happening in all sorts of religious spaces and interfaith spaces, and that's great. And there are certainly nuances and gray areas. Not any one religion is right or wrong. So we leave those spaces. And, another example, right? Maybe alcohol. Maybe you came from a church environment that would teach you alcohol is always bad. And then you get out of that space and you're like, wait, no, this is fun. I'm enjoying, having drinks with friends and so on and so forth. But then there's some nuance there as well, because, for some people who have alcohol abuse issues, alcohol's not good for them. For others, there's some nuance in those areas. So we go out into this new world and we want to carry that sort of non-binary thinking, and everything is on a spectrum. And sure, if you want to look at each concept through that lens, but there are certain things that the church always acted morally gray on that are, when you exit the church environment, you start to realize, there are some clear right and wrong, morally good, morally evil things.
Example?
Right. So, for example, sexual abuse, right? And the church tended to act pretty funny when it came to sexual abuse, right? Like
the man who harmed you, maybe it was an abuse, maybe it was a messy relationship. I'm telling you how they grade out the black and white stuff, right? If you were raped or harmed, how did you participate in the harm that was done to you? Like they really do try and he's not the bad guy. We have to have grace and love for the one who abused you. And how many people end up giving standing ovations to them? After they get up and cry a few tears about how they had a failing and they never are specific about what they've done. And it's this graying. You're right. That's a great example.
Suddenly it's very complicated. It's all a very complicated situation when it's pretty clear that there's a victim of sexual abuse here and there's somebody who abused their power here. And, I think this brings up a whole other conversation as well about how poorly the church teaches concepts such as consent, it's necessary for them to not teach consent because of the way that those hierarchies function. In any case, that's a conversation for another day. But
there's another case where yes or no matters, right? Like the binaries, right? Like, are you saying yes to doing something or no? Like, we don't need to live in ambiguity in every single area. Sometimes we need to know where things are landing.
Right. Otherwise,
are we going to stand up against a predator in a church? Are we going to consent to something? Yes or no? Like things where we need answers.
Right. Otherwise, people will be harmed. So yeah. So I think, the idea about binary thinking, I think maybe flip it on its head when you leave the church. I don't know. It's worth really kind of analyzing and thinking through. I mean, for me, the principle to walk away with is somebody going to be harmed by my desire to hold on to a spectrum of thought and to kind of not land in any particular, one or the other viewpoint? If nobody is being harmed, then maybe this is a good area to maintain some kind of nuance. But if somebody is going to be harmed by that mentality,
your ambiguity,
then absolutely,
all sides, good people on all sides kind of talk, right?
Yeah, yep,
yeah, and it's true. Like the whole, often we are victims and villains, and it's not all Marvel superhero. Here's the bad guy, here's the good guy. In life, we're all more complicated. But I think in situations of abuse, that gets used, especially in Christian environments, to excuse people who are predators, who are abusing their power, to downplay a lot of that stuff. And I think where I was going to with regard to white people specifically and how they handle the idea of, you can't tell me things are wrong anymore because I came out of environments where they told me I had to think like this or I can't do this or whatever. And you telling me my behavior is harmful is you're being an evangelical with me because you're telling me what I have to do. I would say that a lot of times I think white people use the fear of binary thinking as an excuse to not take a stand, and they will often misapply. Like, I like that you gave examples of where taking a firm stance is needed, where graying things is actually quite harmful. You gave some really concrete things in that. And I think often white people are I think where it comes from, probably there's a few things, but one of them is actually very evangelical. It's this idea of needing to be perfect. And so the idea of having any yes or no's on things means you could be wrong. And white people often struggle with being wrong. They often struggle with that whole perfectionism thing of the supremacy idea, the idea that you get it all right. So now if there are no right or wrong on anything, then you can't be called out on anything. Then that feels like a safe place. And I think it's a fear of change, of growth, of wanting to be challenged when you are making a mistake, of a desire to never make mistakes. And I think that needs to go. Like, I think that is something that needs to change. I want to give a shout out to the Thereafter podcast with Megan Crozier and Cortland Coffey. They run a great podcast. I know they even talk right in their intro about, living in the binaries. No shade on them with my conversation. Yeah. I want to actually give a plug. They did 2 episodes on deconstruction recently. I'm going to say the month of November. There's 2 different ones in the last, couple of weeks that they've put out talking about this. And, they talk about enjoying pushback, enjoying people disagreeing with them. And I know even in my Discord, I've had moments where I've, with them, disagreed on different things. And I've gotten from Megan, a thank you. I've gotten an appreciation for that. And, it's always refreshing when you have people who are, they're able to, they see that as important. The idea of being able to admit when you're wrong, being able to grow, being allowed to make mistakes. And actually, there's something that Megan had said in her episode that I found challenging. She was, kind of critiquing people who are like, you've only been out of evangelicalism for a little bit, you should sit down. And she was kind of laughing at that. And honestly, I've made those comments. Like, I have, Megan, you are speaking directly to me. And I take your challenge and I take your rebuke and I appreciate it. At the same time, and in my defense, and I'll grow and learn from it. But I do think that sometimes when we speak quickly about stuff that we haven't had time to sit with or process, we can end up still doing a lot of harm. And I think there's a lot that can be done by taking a step back for a bit and just learning and listening. And I think for myself anyway, that's one of the things that I've seen happen and unfold in terms of harm that's sometimes done in deconstruction spaces is, people can be very reactionary without actually taking the time to maybe do some therapy, to do some learning, to do some growing. But what I really loved is she was just talking about how there needs to be more voices in the community and not less, and that this idea of what you were saying, people amassing these massive followings where they become the new mega church leader in the deconstruction zone. And she was like, no, there's, if you're thinking, should I start when there's already a lot of voices? Yes, you should. More people are necessary. It's not just about filling okay, now we got the Asian podcast, we got the Black podcast, we got the woman podcast. No, you should be listening to many Asian people. You should be listening to many women. One voice does not speak for everyone. We all have a multitude of perspectives, and yeah, listen to more people, not less. Yeah. So
having said that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I did want to give a shout out to one of our Dauntless
podcasts so having said
that I feel is.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm done.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So having said that, I think it's worth tossing out a couple plugs out there. A podcast that I really enjoy and I've interacted with the hosts on a few occasions is How Gay Thou Art, and both of the hosts come from a very similar Christian background to my own, this sort of fundamentalist Christian background. Both of the hosts are queer, and they sort of go through their Christian history through the lens of queer people. And it's beautiful. It's funny. They are hysterical. So I really enjoy that. I don't know if you're like me and you grew up as a kid going to Awana, they have an episode about Awana, and it's great. It's well researched and it's a lot of fun. So plug for them. That's one voice that I would highly recommend. You had mentioned the Thereafter podcast. There are a whole slew of other podcasts, both within our Dauntless Media Collective network of podcasts. There's the Irreverent Media Group that has a number of podcasts there. And then there's also a brand new group that some of our own producers here at Dauntless Media Collective have gotten involved with Bradley Onishi and the work that he's doing in developing a more academic kind of group of educational podcasts around a lot of these topics that we talk about here at Dauntless and at a Irreverent Media Group. And that,
ooh, I'm glad you went there.
Yeah, that group is called Axis Mundi. And they basically are bringing together scholars who are looking at the world at large, particularly through this lens of deconstruction and decolonization, and kind of seeing how that's affecting, our society from a more academic lens than some of our podcasts are. So I recommend going and checking out Axis Mundi's work as well.
Oh man, so we were doing recommendations, and before you even brought up Axis Mundi, I was going to mention On God's Campus, which is one of those actually. And one of the recent ones I listened to was actually an episode with Brad Onishi talking about white Christian nationalism, which a lot of the Axis Mundi stuff does from different angles. And On God's Campus is specifically focused in general on it's the queer voices from the queer underground going into basically Christian schools and kind of the history in the U.S. I mean, they did a great job with Bob Jones, your alma mater, in one of their episodes. They've talked about it quite a bit. They also, Brad's episode recently was just phenomenal and unpacking a lot of, when you're coming out of evangelical culture and why you'd even get sucked into that and what it looks like coming out of that, and his own journey. It was fascinating, but also tying it to a lot of the history of why evangelicals took up abortion as a cause, the segregation account. They just went all over the place, and helping understand a bigger zoom out lens of where we are right now in the U.S. and how it ties into what's going on today in education and all over. So I want to give a plug for that. Check that episode out. I'm trying to think some of the other ones I mentioned Straight White American Jesus when it came to Israel and Palestine, but I also mentioned the Bible Benevolence. So I have to give a plug. That episode called The Good Book was great. It really helps people who are deconstructing very evangelical understanding of the Bible. And I think those conversations really do need to happen, like to understand what it serves to believe in inerrancy and the harm that comes out of it, to understand why that was created, to understand what it does, to look at scripture in that kind of a lens, the harm that it does to people groups. So I want to give a plug for that. Oh man. Oh, Veterans of Culture War.
Veterans of Culture Wars. Yep.
Yes.
Zach and
Dave Lester. Yeah. They do a great podcast. Again, I don't listen to too many white men, but as Zach said, he's been in therapy, and that's helpful. That is helpful when you're listening to white men, that they've taken the time to unpack. And actually their 100th episode is what I wanted to plug. They do one on religious trauma. So I think it'd be really relevant to people listening to this. I have so many religious trauma podcast things I've listened to recently that have been really helpful. I'm not going to go through them all, but yeah, that one was great. I learned a lot from it. It was a really vulnerable episode too, of Zach giving some of his own story. I do a lot of traveling to get from Nate to me. So I do a lot of podcasts listening to, and wanted to share some good resources out there for those coming out of these spaces.
Yeah. And if you're also looking for more collaborative or interactive resources, you would mention the Thereafter podcast. So Megan and Cortland from the Thereafter podcast are getting together with Tori and Justin from the Go Home Bible You're Drunk podcast, and they're putting on an event in Portland on the weekend, on February 17th and 18th. Actually, I don't know if that's a weekend. It might be, because it's 2 days. I am not looking at a calendar right now. So it's on February 17th and 18th, 2024. And the event is called Content Warning. So if you're looking for like a collaborative space, just a space to share ideas and interact with other folks who have come out of very oppressive religious structure, particularly when it comes to human sexuality, this is the event for you. There is both an in-person and virtual.
I think purity culture is the theme.
Purity culture is the theme. That's where the conversations are going to be on. They've got a number of podcasters and therapists and authors. Just people are going to be getting together to share thoughts, experiences, and ideas. So it's going to be happening online and in person. If you happen to live in or around the Portland, Oregon area, or will be in that area, on
all the cool stuff happens on the West Coast.
I know.
They really are like activists out there. I feel like the East Coast were like a bunch of just like
we tend to operate in silos out here. I think from my time,
it's the culture.
Yeah, from my time visiting the West Coast, I've noticed that they live at a very different pace of life than we do out here, and they seem to have more.
Slow down enough to build community, whereas maybe out here it's a little more hectic.
They have more time. It's almost like they have more time to build these sorts of things, whereas out here on the East Coast, we're kind of like in our little silos because our 9-to-5s are taking up all of our energy and attention. But anyway, if you're out on the West Coast, go check that out, or if you want to do it online. I don't know that info is out there, but there is a website, so just head over to contentwarningevent.com, and all of that info should be out there. And then I'll give ourselves a plug, particularly the Dauntless Media Collective. Gail, you were talking about how people who want to add their voices, if you're even considering, if you've come out of an oppressive religious structure, whether that's evangelicalism or another form of oppressive religion, and you want to share your story, whether that's religious trauma, spiritual abuse, whatever that looks like, and you're thinking a podcast might be the avenue, talk to us. Shoot us a message on the Dauntless Media Collective. We would love to speak with you, to share resources, and possibly even have you join our network if that suits us. Either way, we are more than happy to help. We've got a number of people who are always willing to share resources and even to just give advice for any new podcasters. So if you're out there thinking, I have a story I want to tell, or I think that I have ideas that I want to get out there, look, podcasting is fun. It can develop great friendships, and I think the more of our podcasts that are out there, the better, because I took a look at the religion and spirituality category on Apple Podcasts, and it's still pretty dominated by the people and groups that we all came from. So the more voices that are out there like ours, I think the better the podcasting world would be. So if you like, especially for those of you out there who are like, I think this is something that I would want to do, but I have no idea how to even start. Even if we aren't necessarily a great fit for each other, our, network and you and your podcast, we are more than willing to give you advice, to shoot you some resources online to help you get started doing this thing.
Yeah.
Because the more of us telling these stories out there, the better.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think that's pretty much all we wanted to talk about, right?
Do we want to? I mean, we're kind of like, you guys have been sticking it out with us for a while. This has been a long run-on conversation all over the map. When we wrote our bullet points down, we were like, wow, this is going to be a long conversation. Because just what we thought, we jotted down like 5-10 things. And we're like, all right, yeah, this will take a long time to cover. And then we've kind of gone off on a lot of tangents. But did we want to end with any of the TV shows we've been into? I know we talked about podcasts we've been listening to, but any shows we've been into lately? Any stuff we've been watching?
Well, I don't know if you know me, if you happen to be one of my friends, you probably know that one of my favorite shows is Doctor Who, which like I'll be honest, it's sort of, I don't want to say guilty pleasure because I am proud of that, but I'm also like, it's so nerdy. It's a very, very nerdy show. But I love it. I've loved it since I started watching it, like way back in the, if you happen to be a Whovian, which is the nickname for Doctor Who fans. So we all, like, Whovians tend to calculate their time with the show by which Doctor they started watching. I started watching towards the end of 10, and I really kind of dove into the show in earnest with, from start to finish with 11. So I would say probably my Doctor would be Matt Smith, with a nod to David Tennant's first run as the Doctor. But yeah, so we were.
My favorite Doctor that I'm starting with is Ncuti Gatwa. And in fact, I probably wouldn't be even trying to dive into Doctor Who if I didn't love Ncuti. I don't know if any of our audience people listening have ever watched Sex Education. That is a show we watched recently. And it was, I feel like if you've come out of evangelicalism, you will find this maybe hard to watch in the sense that it's graphic at times. And, we've been taught to be so ashamed of bodies and sex and all of that. So that's the hurdle. But if you're willing to like push yourself past that and actually have these discussions we've never had, watch what consent can look like, watch, the struggles of different topics related to sex that are never discussed, that kind of all get ignored inside of evangelicalism. They go everywhere. They really take you through different things and such healthy topics that they get into that need to be discussed. I mean, consent's an obvious one. But I mean, there's just so much representation, whether it's asexuality. They really take it in so many different directions and show all the varieties of people that exist. And yeah, the ways that sex can be healthy, the unhealthy views around sex, a lot touching on misogyny. Oh, there was just so many powerful scenes. I almost feel like I want to do have a few episodes on sex education at some point with people who want to talk about this with me, because I loved it. But yeah, Ncuti Gatwa was amazing in that show.
So if you don't know actors' names, if you're one of those people who like watch a TV show and never learn the actors' names, but you have watched Sex Education, Ncuti Gatwa played Eric Effiong, and he was probably my favorite character in the show. I'll be honest, it's his presence, his energy.
And his storyline, around being queer and Christian at the same time, and what that looks like, Black community. It was fun too. Usually covering somebody who's a queer Christian, it's like, again, the idea of a monolith, the idea of a one person story versus hearing many stories, right? Like there was 2 different characters in that show that were both queer ex-Christian. Well, one was an ex-Christian, one wasn't, but came out of those backgrounds and had different approaches, different takes, different ways that impacted them, and different ways that they were going to go forward because of their experiences. And I found that to be so rich. Like it's rare enough to have the topic discussed, but then beautiful to see the validity of different approaches to situations like that happen, and the complexities around it. So yeah, had to give a plug for Sex Education.
So that's that's our exposure to Ncuti Gatwa. So when I found out that Ncuti Gatwa was going, when I found out that Ncuti Gatwa was going to be the next Doctor, I didn't actually know who he was because I hadn't watched Sex Education at that point. So the only thing that I saw in the article was the first Black Doctor and the first openly gay actor to play the part of the Doctor. So I was like, awesome, this is what we've needed. But I had no idea who he was. And then watching Sex Education, I think watching Sex Education, I don't think it dawned on me that this was the guy that was announced to play the Doctor until a little bit later, and I started doing Googling about Sex Education and is there going to be a season 4? There's not going to be a season 4, unfortunately. But when I started doing that Googling, I stumbled on that article that showed, that unveiled Ncuti Gatwa as the new Doctor, and I about lost my shit. I was like, he's playing the Doctor? I'm all on board. And that I had actually kind of taken some time off of Doctor Who because it was losing my attention the last few series, which was really unfortunate because I was so excited about the fact that we had the first female Doctor, but the storylines just weren't gripping. We would get a few really good episodes here and there, but by and large, it just wasn't.
Yeah, when men are writing for women, it's not always gripping, even if women are playing the characters. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I had kind of lost touch with the show, but then seeing that announcement brought me right back, and I was like, okay, let me get caught up. And it didn't take long for me to get caught up. I think I was only one season behind, which was in Doctor Who. It was only 6 episodes or 8 episodes I had to catch up on. So.
I'll let you get back to Doctor Who talk, but I did want to add one more Ncuti comment. I didn't even realize that he was in the Barbie movie because I watched Barbie before Sex Education. So then I was like, what? He was one of the Kens? Because there were so many Kens at some point that were all in that. And I mean, Simulier was amazing. They're Canadian, by the way. But I had to go back and rewatch those scenes just to rewatch Ncuti Gatwa as one of the Kens. And then
it turned out Emma Mackey was also one of the Barbies, and they were each other's Barbie and Ken.
Emma Mackey, for those who don't know actors' names, played Maeve, one of the main characters in Sex Education. Yeah, they were both. That's true. They were both in Barbie. Yeah. It's so fascinating. Yeah, we did watch those in the wrong order. We should have started with. Most people had already watched Sex Education. True. We were a little behind. So if you're behind and you have not watched it, I think it just wrapped up its last season. So you won't be super behind if you go binge watch it all.
It's so bingeable, that show. Like you could watch that show in a week easily, and. Yeah. It's I mean, unless you're doing what we do and watching what we were doing and watching shows long distance with each other and only having a set number of hours per evening. But anyway, so Doctor Who, Ncuti Gatwa was playing the new Doctor, and we're also at the 60th anniversary of the show, and I was excited to dive back into the show at its 60th anniversary, and they had 3 episodes as specials, and I think maybe we'll put out a Patreon episode where I go on ad nauseum about my feelings about the show and narrative itself. But I think what's worth talking about in this conversation is how the show is now really paying attention to representation and paying attention to how it brings about or brings to the forefront its marginalized characters and
go woke or go broke, Nate.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
so
but I mean, I did watch a few of the older episodes and on those topics.
Yeah, some of them not so great. I mean, over the course of time, the show did improve over the years. But there's a certain writer who just keeps on stumbling over and over and over again, which, we'll leave that alone for now. In any case,
has a lot of thoughts on Doctor
I do have a lot of thoughts.
I hear a lot of them. So that's why I've attempted to watch Doctor Who, because I was like, he's so passionate, and I don't have to like everything Nate likes. There's a lot of things he's into that are not my thing. But I'm especially not big into horror. Suspense are not my genres. Suspense I can if there's a very deep, meaningful storyline. But I think the first episodes that I've ever watched of Doctor Who felt very Goosebumps to me. I don't know if any of you read the Goosebumps books or TV show back in the day, but they had that vibe for me, which I love nerd stuff. I'm a big Trekkie, but there's a level of cheese or cringe or camp that it's too much for me. And yeah, that one, I guess maybe the ones I fell on in the beginning were just not it for me. So I did watch the recent, intro to Shoot You Got One's Doctor, and I will try and see what I can stick out with. Although I did skip the second episode. Nate,
I figured it would
more
be
on the horror side.
Yeah, it's so campy that it might tone down the horror, but the overall tone of that episode is pretty much horror with like camp as elements tossed in there. So I don't know that would really be for you, Gail, but I feel
like that's a love language. If you are with a partner who literally will screen a show that you probably won't like and pick out the best highlights and just play them for you, that's got to be. I mean, I know the love languages books don't have that in it, but I just think that it should be added in to have a partner who's like, oh, what was the other show you did that with me recently? It was so good. It was
so Good Omens. So you're not a Good Omens fan. You watched the first season and it wasn't for you.
It wasn't for me. But then there was some scenes in season 2, and I have to recommend it to all evangelical people, but it was on the story of Job. They redid. And I mean, if you're a Doctor Who fan, this actually does tie together because David Tennant, and he's one of the main characters in Good Omen. He's the demon. But they really play with the idea, though, is he the bad guy in it? Because often the things God is telling the good angel to do is really like just awful. And the story of Job just kind of goes through that in a very, I think the amazing part of watching that was like, if you know your Bible, and I grew up a Bible nerd, this was accurate. Mm-hmm. Like they did Bible benevolence at the ending, and the demon actually was kind of nicer than what was actually in the story of Job and how things did turn out. Mm-hmm. So like it was, maybe a nicer version. It's like a VeggieTales version, like where the genocide is just throwing slushy at people, like it was kind of made into to soften the whole blow of how horrific it really was in this. But the beginning is like literally almost word for word out of the Bible, and it's hilarious and horrifying and fascinating and I think a lot of us read parts of the Bible and Christians put spins on it and try and make it all look like, see, God is good. And even if it doesn't make sense, here is a positive spin. It actually sounds worse when they're done talking. You just feel even more frustrated with all the stuff they're overlooking, all the obvious points that are just, being twisted into something else so it doesn't look bad. Exactly that. The Bible benevolence, the stuff you're doing to try and clean up God's image in that story. And this episode, I don't even know what the episode number is, but it's in season 2.
I think
Google
it was episode 2.
Job.
Yeah.
Episode 2 of season 2. Fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately just watch it through, because if you are, Good Omens, I know it's not your style, Gail, but like for the average ex-evangelical who's a bit nerdy, Good Omens is sort of ideal. And Neil Gaiman is well known for being very vocally supportive of queer people and the trans community. He's very anti J.K. Rowling, which is always hysterical. But he's the one that wrote the book that the TV show is based off of, and he's like, his work is kind of perfect for ex-evangelicals because he likes to take that sort of critical look at traditional ideas about the Bible and religion through a very humorous, dark humor kind of way. So yeah, I highly recommend Good Omens. If you are going to watch it, just watch it straight through. Don't just like jump to an episode. If you are not interested in the show itself, episode 2 of season 2 is the one that has the retelling of Job's story that Gail was talking about.
So hilarious. Yeah. You can even find clips on YouTube. It's so good. So good.
Yeah. So
brilliant.
Yeah. So we didn't even touch on why I was bringing up Doctor Who for this conversation, but we're almost at 2 hours. So maybe we should save that for another conversation.
Wait, is that not something you could throw into the Patreon conversation that you want to have?
I'd rather talk about that, outside from behind a paywall. I don't want to put that behind there. So.
This has been, I don't want to say we're burdening you with making this episode long. I want to say this. You've missed us, hopefully, if you're bothering to tune back in after all this time. This is our thank you for being patient with us. We're giving you a nice long episode and just going through a whole bunch of thoughts that we've had as we've been away, what we've been up to, what we've been watching on TV, stuff with our wedding. We just wanted to kind of let you into our thoughts, into our space lately, where we've been at. And And thank you. And throw out a longer episode because it's been a long time, and we're happy that you're still somehow clicking play on us and missing us, and we're touched. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed coming along for the ride.
Yeah. Alrighty. Stay tuned. We've got some good stuff coming up soon.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast. We're so glad you decided to join us today.
If you haven't already, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, and pretty much every other podcast app. Just search for Full Mutuality on your app of choice, or visit our website, fullmutuality.com, for links to all of the apps that you can subscribe to us on.
And if you enjoyed what you've heard, we'd love it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on our website. A quick review is one of the best ways you can support us.
Speaking of support, you can also partner with us on Patreon. For just $5 US a month, you'll be helping us produce this podcast, and you'll get access to other content, such as exclusive episodes, access to occasional live-streamed recording sessions, and more. Just head over to patreon.com/fullmutuality to sign up.
Thanks again for hanging out with us today, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast.